The hunter took off his gloves and let them fall. He thought that he should pray, but he had no prayer for such a thing. It had snowed lightly in the night, and her hair was gold and crystalline, and her eyes were frozen cold and hard as stones. One of her boots had fallen off and stood in snow beneath her.
Off the coast of New Orleans, March of 1973, Bobby, dropping slowly through the dark toward the intermittent flare of the torch below, he dropped down to the fuselage. Euler had cut away the latches and the door stood open. Euler was just inside the plane, and Bobby joined him, and Euler shone his light down the aisle of the plane at the rows of passengers buckled in and dead. Then Euler swam along outside. Bobby went forward into the cockpit. There was a space in the panel where one of the avionics boards had been pulled out. The screws were disconnected. Why? The pilot's flight bag was missing too. Somebody got to this plane after it went down, and before Bobby and Euler had gotten there. It was sunrise and Bobby and Euler were tired and very cold. They did not dive again to bring up the 9 bodies from the plane, as that had not been in their contract. Each man went home. Bobby returned to his small walk-up room upstairs from the bar. Bobby agreed to meet up with Euler again after he'd gotten some sleep. He thought about the sunken plane with 9 dead passengers and couldn't figure how it had all happened. It was dark before Bobby came down the stairs to the bar.
Things don't seem right. Can't even see the damn plane, and some fisherman is supposed to have found it. Bullshit.
There's a panel missing from the instrumentation, and the pilot's flight bag is missing.
How many bodies you count in that plane?
7 passengers, plus the pilot and co-pilot, and 1 seat that was supposed to have somebody in it but doesn't. That is a new plane, and I saw nothing wrong with it, except it's under 50 feet of water.
I don't have no story about how that plane got down there. Nothing about this situation makes a lot of sense. A private jet full of corporate hotshots.
They're not corporation guys, I'm telling you. They had on suits, but the wrong kind of suits. Notice their shoes? They were like foreign agents.
Okay, Professor. You thinking somebody been down there first? Before us? Bobby, they would have had to cut their way into the plane. Same as us.
Maybe somebody inside the plane let them in.
I don't know why I talk to you when all you do is scare me shitless. My plan? Remain totally fucking ignorant about the whole thing.
Hey, Euler, who's your friend?
Bianca, how goes it? This here's Bobby Western.
Bobby, I'm Bianca. What do you do? Bobby?
I'm a salvage diver. Like your friend Euler.
Oh, he's all of that. Bobby's a diver and a physicist in his spare time.
Wow, a real physicist?
Don't listen to Euler here. I salvage mostly stuff or whatever I get asked.
Truth is, Bobby here hopes to die in the depths to atone for his sins. Right, Bobby?
Oh, Euler, stop. I know he's just messing.
My dear, you are looking at a man who chose diving, although he knew he was afraid of water. Maybe to draw the sympathy of beautiful women like yourself. Now, take me. Old Oiler's just an outcast to society, but Bobby's an outcast to God.
What you do to get Oiler picking on you?
Oh, Oiler's all right. If you'll excuse me, I'm out of here. Night, Bianca, and Oiler, and peace to all.
I know what you're thinking, and he's a darling, but you don't know the tragic story.
Tragic story, he just walked out.
Oh, he likes you, believe me, but his heart is already spoken for. But, like I said, tragic.
What is he, gay or married?
Squire Bobby is in love with his sister. It's true. There's never been another.
No. That's gross. That don't make sense.
What's worse is that she's dead. An amazing young girl. I met her 3 years ago. She was 16 and beautiful, and I said, "What are you doing, Blossom?" And she said, "Algebraic equations." Who can explain the heart? Squire Bobby tore himself from her and went to race cars. And are you familiar with the ending of Romeo and Juliet?
Yes, what about it?
Juliet wakes up from the drug just as Romeo is drinking the poison, right? And she was about to get all happy. And then he just falls on top of her, dead. Well, Bobby was in a coma in Italy for about 3 months, and Alicia just didn't think he was going to come out of it.
So what are you saying? That his sister? Oh my God.
He didn't go right home, but walked through the quarter. A ship's horn on the river. He thought about his life, and he thought about the dive that morning. He had told Oiler, "We haven't heard the last of this one." When he got back to his door, there was a man waiting at the doorway leading up.
Mr. Western, I wonder if I might have a word.
You would be. Ah, special agents. Cup of tea?
Think you know. I have to say, you don't seem particularly surprised to see me today.
Should I be? I had this feeling.
Mr. Western, I'd like to ask you about the dive you were on a few hours ago. There seems to be a passenger missing. How many passengers were on the plane?
7.
Apparently, there were supposed to be 8 passengers. There were 8 passengers listed on the manifest.
There's no manifest for a private plane, so I don't know what you have in your little hands.
It was a charter.
It wasn't a charter. With a charter, there's a stewardess. FAA regulations require a stewardess on all commercial flights of more than 7 passengers.
How would you happen to know this sort of detail about flight regulations?
It's industry standard. The kind of detail I thought special agents would be up on. Unless, of course, you're just testing me.
Maybe manifest is the wrong word. What we have is a list of passengers from the corporation.
You may have a list. I don't think there's a corporation. I don't think it was a corporate flight.
You have a lot of opinions about that flight.
I don't have opinions, I have questions. My partner and I thought the aircraft had been in the water a while, and we don't think the plane sinking was called in by fishermen.
You thought another diver had been in that plane before you?
We think maybe that somebody else had been in that plane before we got to it.
Of course, if you took something from the plane, it would make sense to claim that you were not the first people there.
How many salvage divers do you know? We don't take things from planes.
Why don't you tell me what you think happened with that plane?
While it was flying, and then it went into the water. And not at 500 miles per hour, or it would have been in a million pieces. That plane settled into the water. I think because somebody wanted it there.
That somebody would have to be the pilot, would he not?
Or somebody standing behind the pilot with a gun to his head.
And how did you get into the plane?
We cut out the door latch with a torch.
And did either of you open the luggage bay?
Our job was to look for survivors, and there were none. Why would we open the luggage bay? That wasn't the assignment. It's a plane full of dead bodies. Would you hang around to explore?
Are you aware that the plane's black box was no longer in the instrument panel?
Obviously. And the pilot's flight bag had been taken as well.
Taking the box out of the plane would require both knowledge of the plane, and tools, and skill. You are a pilot yourself, aren't you, Mr. Western?
Yes, I used to fly, but not anymore. Look, why don't we save time here and you tell me what you think happened on that plane?
Well, I'm not at liberty to postulate for you, but you say you took nothing from the plane.
I discovered those things missing from that plane and my partner, and I got out. Quick as we could.
And just how long had you worked at your current occupation?
I've worked for Long's for a little over a month. I'm a subcontractor and Long gets me jobs.
And what was your occupation prior to that?
I was a racer. I raced Formula One cars in Italy and France.
That's a rather exotic and expensive career for a salvage diver, isn't it? And why did you happen to move to New Orleans to subcontract as a diver?
I was in Iraq and was no longer able to compete. I came back here for personal reasons.
How do you suppose some other person got into the plane, stole the pilot's bag, and the flight recorder before you and Mr. Euler got there, but you two didn't find the door swinging open? You had to burn the lock. Did that fellow seal it back shut again on his way out?
Look, friend. I live in the upstairs room over a bar. Everything I got you can see in here. I didn't sink a plane and kill 9 people as part of a master plan to do God knows what.
How would I even have known that I would be the diver they called? So I could go down there and pretend it was my first time.
You'll be hearing from me.
It was mid-afternoon when Bobby rented the boat and cast off into the bay. He talked to Euler again, but he did not tell Euler that he was going to do a little detective work. 9 people left on that plane and 8 bodies were identified. The plane's door was sealed. So the best guess was that the 9th passenger, whoever he was the one who opened the door and shut it behind him. Before this man said his goodbyes, he went into the cockpit and took the pilot's bag and unscrewed the flight recorder and then fled with anything else he wanted. But if that version was the real version, it had to mean that passenger number 9 knew the plane was going down the minute it took off. He knew that everybody else was going to die, but he was going to live. The 2 pilots would not have deliberately soft landed in water and then allowed their aircraft to sink into the water. So passenger number 9 must have had a few tricks up his sleeve. Whatever he took from the plane must have mattered a lot to him. And he had help from other parties, either before the plane left, or after he bubbled up out of the water, in its new location, or he had help in both locations. The FBI agent had to know more than he was willing to tell Bobby. But he seemed to believe that Bobby was involved, which meant he did not know everything. Euler told him that the special agent had found him at his home too, and asked him the same kinds of questions he had asked Bobby. Euler felt that the pressure on them both was going to get worse. Euler said, "What the hell do you do when you are innocent, but telling the police that only makes them get madder?" Euler said, "Do you think it's drugs?" Bobby told him, "Nobody in government cares this much about drugs. There was an island chain not more than a mile from where the small plane went down. There was no sign of Coast Guard, which Bobby thought strange because the plane had now been at the bottom for 2 days now and there was not a word in the news. Unless the plane and the bodies had been recovered in the night. He saw the island ahead and thought how very odd it would look to an FBI agent if Bobby just happened to be in this area the day after he dived for the plane. Only one of the islands had adequate cover, and that's where he was taking the boat. He slowed. If he had been passenger 9, this was where he would have stopped. Bobby ran the boat around the island, hopped out, and stuck the anchor in the sand. All was quiet. At first he saw nothing, but after some scouting he saw tracks in the sand. Could have been wetsuit booties. He followed them into the thick and then lost them, but kept going. Then he saw a speck of orange, and he moved closer. It was a 2-man rubber raft that had been deflated and partially covered over with branches and rocks. He pulled the thing free and spread it out. It was wet, and it seemed brand new. Now would be a great moment for the owner of the raft to return for his craft. It was time to get out of this silent jungle and off this island. He had not proved anything. The raft could have been left by kids on an adventure. On the other hand, it looked to be an expensive raft to be left behind. Suppose passenger 9 had kept the thing in his bag in the overhead bin. He knew the plane would land in the water at night. He knew it would quickly sink. He was carrying something important or taking it from one of the other passengers. He floated to the surface, pulled the cord, and had his ride to the island to wait for his pickup. What he wanted now was to get back to town. And that soothing anonymity that was so much a part of New Orleans. And a drink and a little dinner. He needed to think. When Bobby went back into the office, he was to find that his salvaging outfit had been prepaid for the job within hours of the crash. Anonymously. This made Bobby furious. Professional divers are not hired guns. Divers can be criminally liable if it turns out they retrieved things that were stolen or part of some underworld activity. Whoever hired Bobby and Euler to dive for the plane did not want his name used. There could be no honest reason for this, and it cast a shadow over Bobby and Euler. But Doug took it because that was how he ran the office and because it was money. Doug asked Bobby if he wanted another job. Doug told him that an oil crew was looking for a diver for an offshore rig in Pensacola. Work on a deep-sea oil rig would get Bobby out of town just when he wanted to be away from here. Doug told him they would chopper him out and drop him. He'd be there a week or so. Bobby knew Doug ran a loose office. That was just the way it was. Before he left, Euler asked him to join him on a job in Venezuela. He would be working inside a giant pipeline across the ocean floor 560 feet below the surface, replacing flange joints that were leaking. He'd be inside a large pipe and wouldn't even get wet. Bobby asked him if he would get claustrophobic working for days inside a pipe on the ocean floor. Euler said, "I was cut out for this line of work." The whole thing didn't feel right to Bobby. Not now. Bobby was not feeling like that kind of risk-taking at the moment. So Bobby told him no. The night they dropped him off, it was storming, which made landing in a helicopter more interesting than usual. They told him the rest of the crew was coming but was delayed by the weather, so he would be alone, at least for the night. The pilot said, "I can take you back with me, if you don't dig being on a rig by yourself." Bobby said he would be okay. The chopper took off and Bobby was alone. Outside, the sound of the weather was deafening. He got inside and felt the stillness. Oil rigs were built to survive anything, so once the steel door was latched, The inside was quiet as a tomb. He was free to explore which he liked. He found a vacant room and claimed it, dropping his bag. The whole place had the look of a maximum security prison. He looked for the galley and there was nobody to ask where things were. He found the cafeteria, empty, and he was aware of his own footsteps and thought they were too loud. The kitchen was gigantic and smelled like metal, but he found canned beans and canned fruit in the cupboard and made himself a simple meal. When he was done, he wandered his way back to his room and then stepped out again and went about opening more doors. He was looking for other persons. Or maybe he was trying to eliminate a surprise. He latched his door and put the chair in front of it. The door didn't lock. He lay his head on the pillow and could feel the vibrations of the rig through the fixtures. Cindy slept. And in his dream they were back in those woods in Warpsburg. And she was barefoot, in a diaphanous robe she had made herself. She would smile courageously and dance for him what she had prepared by borrowing from Greek textbooks and the poses on Grecian urns. In that place in the woods she had prepared like a theater. And he sat in the damp grass and she leaned over and whispered, "I'd have been your shadow lane, the keeper of that house alone, wherein your soul is safe." He woke with a start and knew only that it was night. In this strange place, he wanted to see the storm outside. When he reached topside and opened the steel door, the wind nearly took him across the platform, and water slapped his face. Nobody would be coming out to this platform tonight, and maybe not tomorrow. He was marooned. He went back to the galley to get a drink. And he saw a coffee cup on a table and asked himself if it had been there when he was in the galley before. Would he have noticed? And he thought, somebody else is on this rig with me. He called out, "Hello?" He saw a polished meat cleaver hanging in the galley. An effective weapon in a pinch. What if the whole point had been to get him into a place that was isolated and where his death and disposal would go unnoticed? If he didn't return, would Doug report it to the police? He took the meat cleaver back to his room and pushed a heavy cabinet against the door. And then, in spite of himself, he fell back asleep. The last time Bobby visited, his grandmother asked him if he thought the family had a curse on it. And he asked her, curse for what? She said, the sins of the father. Granella never wanted his mother to marry his father. Alicia called him from Ohio to tell him that Grandmother Western had died. It was 1968. He drove from New York for the funeral only because she asked him. She met him at the door and said, "Let's just leave," and so he didn't go in. At the cafe down the street, she told him that Grandmother had told her that there was gold buried in the basement. She had insisted that Alicia tell Bobby. He was skeptical. He put her on a plane, and later that day he rented a metal detector and bought a shovel, and he drove to the old Western house. He had to take away anything in the basement that had metal because it set off the detector. Hours passed and he got filthy and tired and nearly quit. Then he pulled a heavy length of pipe up out of the ground. With heavy vice grips, he was able to get the end off the pipe, and what tumbled out were US Mint double eagle gold pieces. 200 coins in the length of pipe. There were 16 pipes in all, buried in the dirt of the basement. When Bobby drove away from his grandmother's house, he had a truck full of gold coins, the most recent ones dated to 1930. The next morning, Bobby put a few of the coins into his pocket and drove to a coin dealer he found in the directory. The man told him that they were in mint condition and never put into circulation and worth around $400 each. Bobby walked out of the dealers with $3,000 cash. Then he sold a dozen more of the coins to another coin dealer. Then he went to a car lot and paid cash for a 1968 Dodge Charger with a 426 Hemi engine. Then he bought a stainless steel Smith & Wesson 38 Special with a 4-inch barrel, and for the next few weeks he drove around the Midwest selling batches of coins of a couple dozen. He carried the sacks of coins in with him each night and slept with the 38. The Dodge drove like a scalded rat. And by the time he got to Tucson, Arizona, he had over $900,000 in stacks held by rubber bands stuffed in canvas bags. He telephoned the bar where Alicia said she worked as a waitress.
Hello, is God there?
He usually doesn't come into around 7. Bobby, is that you?
I've got some money for you.
I don't need any money.
You're very welcome, sister. Quite a lot of money. And I bought you a car. Hello, are you there? How did you know I'd go down into that cellar and look?
Because I asked you to. Bobby? Do you remember that time when I danced for you? In the woods? Do you miss those days?
Yes, I remember it. I remember everything.
I got a response from Alexander Grothendieck. Remember I wrote to Grothendieck? He asked me to send him something. I mean, if I have ideas.
That's pretty important. Do you have something to send him?
Yes, I have a paper. Topos theory. I'm going to send it to him.
Been thinking about what I should do given the new circumstances. I'm thinking to go to Europe and race Formula 1. That's a kind of racing. The highest class of international racing.
Europe, yeah, I love it. I'll cook and keep house for you.
You've just been accepted in graduate school. You're supposed to be in Chicago right now.
I'm already in graduate school. I work all day. I don't have to be in Chicago, obviously. If I can do it from Tucson, I could do it from Europe. Why should I listen to you? You dropped out of graduate school to do what? Race Formula 1?
You are significantly better at mathematics than I was at physics.
Don't say that, Bobby. Are you just trying to get away from me?
The crew was choppered in early the next morning. Bobby appeared in the breakfast room and they were a good bunch. At this time, he almost found himself part of some enterprise in a community of men. This was all but unknown to him for most of his life.
Yeah.
There was still little for him to do except to wait until they needed him to dive. Bobby entered the bar and Janice immediately beckoned him over. There were people around, so she tried to keep it light, but it was serious.
Bobby, I'm sorry. You need to know. Euler's dead.
Dead? Where?
At the site. The Venezuela thing. There's more. Brace yourself. That guy is back. He's here at that table in the back. He's been here a little while. I guess he knew you would be coming in tonight. Sorry, Bobby.
Mr. Western joined me. Very sorry to learn of the death of Mr. Euler.
You tell me you're sorry. Like you didn't kill him.
So sorry that that is the impression you have of us.
How did you miss me? All alone on an oil rig.
We get answers from the living, sir, not from the dead.
Just ask me what you want to ask me.
You told me everything you own's in a room upstairs. Were I to walk down the street to the garage where your car is parked, what kind of car would I find?
A Maserati Ghibli. I can explain that.
How does a salvage diver afford one of the world's most expensive cars?
About 3 years ago, my sister and I inherited some money from my grandmother. That's how I supported the racing in Europe.
Of course you have documentation of this inheritance.
Look, there was no paperwork, it was all very informal. You don't work for the IRS, so why did you come back?
Are you aware that Euler's death places you in an awkward spot? Because if you thought he might not to be able to maintain silence, you would have a motive to kill him yourself.
I think you know what was in that plane. And passenger number 9 took you by surprise and got away with the treasure.
Your father was on the team at Los Alamos that constructed the atom bomb, correct?
Is that what was on that plane? Designs for a bomb? You think my dear old dad gave me the plans and I waited until a week ago to sell them to some foreign agents? My sister and I grew up at Los Alamos. And my father visited Hiroshima after the war. You think we would help to spread nuclear weapons?
Forgive me, but you've brought your sister into the conversation twice without my asking a thing about her.
My sister passed away just weeks ago, so I'd appreciate it if you don't talk about her.
Later that day, Bobby discovered that the government had frozen his bank account. A chill came over him and he rushed to the parking garage to find that they had impounded his car. They were squeezing him to get him to talk, but the more he denied, the less they believed.
Afternoon, I'm Klein. We spoke on the phone. A man with certain needs.
You come highly recommended.
You can relax, sir.
Sorry, I suppose I should ask what you charge.
I get $40 an hour, including phone conversations.
And has the clock started?
Not yet. I need to know what you're up to.
Do you get a certain number of strange cases?
The nut cases. I just string them along and take their money.
Oh, you're kidding with me. You said on the phone you don't do divorces. What else don't you do?
Oh, so this is going to be weird. Is that where we're headed? Why don't you just lay it out there as briefly as possible?
Bobby started with the airplane and he finished with the oil rig. He spoke of the government agent and about Euler's unexplained death. He noted the frozen bank account and the impounded Maserati. He even added that for several months he had raced Formula 1 in Europe until he crashed. Klein was a serious listener.
Before we go any further, Mr. Race Driver Salvage Diver, do you want to know what I did before this gig? I was the fortune teller in a carnival. Family carnival. We were Bavarian immigrants. I was a kid. Do you know why I am telling you this? Because sometimes I can read people, the rest of their story.
You're embarrassed to have been a child fortune teller?
No, I loved it. Years ago. Let's talk about you. There are things you aren't telling me.
Is that a problem?
They froze your bank account to force you to seek out other monies. If you were part of the plan, now you would need to reach out for your share.
Then they will see that I wasn't part of a plan. I've no partner to reach out to.
So why aren't you waiting them out? Why aren't you just cooperating?
What do you think really happened with the plane?
Oh, I think you are onto it. The missing passenger is the key. This guy was a pro. He needed everyone else quietly seated because he needed to get to the exit with the captain's bag and the flight recorder without fighting through a panic. Easiest way to do that would be to cause a loss of cabin pressure and everyone faints.
But the pilots control the air pressure in the plane.
Maybe he got to the pilots first. He wants the plane to land gently in the water and then quickly sink. So he doesn't want people jumping up in a panic. Once everybody was out, he needs about 5 or 6 minutes to do his dirty work. He may even have gotten out before the plane submerged.
How did such an elaborate scheme get pinned on the salvage diver?
The new guy in town, and first one to touch the plane.
Wouldn't it have been easier just to steal whatever? Before or after the flight ever took place?
Unless the other passengers were all part of the same group, so he preferred them all out of the way, and you become the patsy. We're not here to guess about missing passengers. You're here for a reason.
If I wanted to disappear, as Bobby Western, have a completely new identity, could you help me to do that?
Yes, I can. It would mean a new driver's license, new social security number, new birth records. I can get you a degree from Harvard if you want.
I already have a degree from Harvard. Will I get to pick the name?
Bobby, you don't get to pick the name or the birthday. Your whole history would be an artifact from a previous person who is, well, not here to complain.
You mean dead?
$2,500 for a new identity. You can't keep the same job, apartment, or home city. If you love salvage diving, do it in Florida. Chances are, you'll never hear from them again. When you're ready, Bobby, to tell me the rest of the story, I'm right here patiently. Eventually, the government will know you were not the guy, and it will be over.
You think I'm keeping things from you?
You went to France in when, August? Your sister was in Arizona.
My sister was invited to France by Dr. Grothendieck after he read her paper. So she came in September.
Then you crashed. And what did your sister do?
For a few weeks I had an apartment. Then I was in a wreck and in a coma.
You woke up from your coma in when, January?
I woke up on or about January 3rd.
It was you in the coma, but you said your sister died? Her age?
My sister was 20. I woke up on or about January 3rd. My sister has been dead for 17 weeks.
You said that the hospital wanted to disconnect life support.
Yes.
Where was your sister during that time?
She was right there. It's what they told me. She refused to do it.
But that was what, November? You woke up in January. Surprised everybody. And by then your sister was already dead? That's...
My sister killed herself, is that it?
A beautiful, healthy girl takes her life because her brother is in a coma. Now the brother says he has to destroy his identity. But you want me to believe that things that look connected are not connected?
Connected? What's so connected?
Just a carnival fortune teller. I'm not here to meddle in your affairs.
I wasn't there when Alicia needed me. It was too late. What she wanted of me. But I had to be racing.
Before you take any steps, Bobby, think about it, 'cause I'll be right here if you need.
He thought about all that Klein told him, but in the end he never went back. If he was going to elude them, he was going to see if he could do it with his own name. But he didn't go back to the office either. And he didn't return to his apartment over the bar. He wasn't going to make it easy for them. He thought about the spring before Alicia had gotten accepted at the University of Chicago. She had been at STELLA MARIS and she was on the meds, and then she signed herself out and went back to their grandmother's. She stopped taking the meds and within a week they were all back. The thalidomide kid and the rest of that group. All at the foot of her bed, and she just put up with it. Before he abandoned the apartment, he removed the medicine cabinet from the wall and withdrew the bundle of her letters that he had hidden in the wall. He'd carry them with him from now on. If he could find where she had put that violin, he could sell it so that he had a little nest egg to start over with. He had told Klein that there was one last letter from her. The very last one. He'd read them all dozens of times, but not the last one. It had been given to him when he came back to the States after waking up from the coma. He told Klein that he had kept the last letter unopened. Klein said, because after you read it, you would know everything you will ever know about her. Klein did not act surprised. He went back to the bar to say goodbye to Janice. Before he could do that, she told him that the special agent had been back again, just poking around. Then she gave him the thin stack of mail that had been gathering. He asked her, "You kept collecting my mail, but you told the agent I wasn't there anymore?" Janice said, "I'm not telling him anything." He told her she might not be seeing him again, and she looked hurt. She said, "I knew it would come to this." She asked, "What about your mail?" He told her, "If it starts piling up, just throw it all out." He sent her a television the first time she was at Stella Maris, and she had wheeled the thing into the room of the woman next door, who was happy. Then she went into her bathroom and took down all the pill bottles and emptied them into the toilet. She had agreed to one session of electroshock therapy. When she got back to her room, the kid was there and he was angry at her. He looked burned, as if he had been hit by lightning. He said to her, "What the hell do you think you were doing?" She never accepted shock treatment again. Her weight was down to under 100 pounds. The kid scolded her about her weight loss too. A few weeks later, she checked herself out of Stella Maris, rented a car with her fake ID, and drove to Tucson, Arizona. During the day, she would sit in the mountains and do equations. The kid caught up with her again and demanded to know why she was not in Chicago. She told him she worked better on math here, in the desert. A few weeks later, Bobby showed up and gave her the Dodge Charger. Bobby worked in a dive shop in Tucson for an old friend who paid him off the books. In a few months, he had enough to buy a second-hand truck. He drove to Idaho and spent the winter in an old farmhouse that had belonged to a friend of his father. The house had a wood stove, but no electricity. He slept on a mattress on the kitchen floor, and when he awoke, he was being stared at by the eyes of field mice glowing by the light of the stove. He got snowed in. The temperature dropped and the truck would not start. To get food, he had to walk into town dragging a wagon. He remembered when he had visited her during her brief time at Chicago. She looked starved and she not left her room in days. Her only concern was his health and his feelings. He took her out to a restaurant and he talked about his upcoming move to Europe to race Formula One. Instead of arguing with him, she encouraged him. He should have seen that as a warning. When the temperature finally rose a little, he had had enough. And he got the truck started and loaded his few provisions and drove away from Idaho forever. It took him about a week in the old truck to drive back east, and he checked into a cheap motel and was at the front door of Stella Maris the next morning. They were surprised to see Bobby again, and he told them he just wanted to visit one of the residents. He asked for Jeffrey, and they told him how kindly Alicia was remembered. Jeffrey recognized him and said, "I suppose you want to talk about her and have a seat." Jeffrey was bipolar and had been one of Alicia's favorites. "She never got what she wanted," said Jeffrey. Bobby asked, "What was it she wanted?" Jeffrey said, "Well, she wanted not to have ever been here in the first place." Bobby said, "She told you that?" Jeffrey said, "Yes, I believe her. I believed everything she said. I miss her." Bobby said, "Did she tell you about her little visitors?" And Jeffrey said she had. Jeffrey asked Bobby, "Do you know the Wisconsin card sorting test?" Bobby knew it. He said, "It's a test of abstract reasoning and what they call executive functions. They put one card at the top and you have to figure from number, color, or shape which is the right match without any clues." Then once you figure that one right, they switch to another combination. One time the match is according to number, another time the match is by shape. It tests your ability to shift your organizational vision quickly. "Boy, you sound like your sister," said Jeffrey. "Alicia was the best there ever was at that game." Bobby said, "If only you could cure people by giving them a psychological test." "That's why she wouldn't stay," said Jeffrey. Bobby said, "When she was 16, I gave her a sports car. We were in Tucson. Within days, she quit her job and drove that thing non-stop all the way back to Chicago." Jeffrey asked about the model. Bobby said it was a Dodge Charger with a Hemi. She didn't even have a license. Jeffrey said, "Did you want her to kill herself?" Bobby said, "No, I wanted her to be free." Jeffrey said, "That's freedom?" Bobby said, "Maybe not, but a fast car in an open road can feel like freedom to some people." On his way out of Stella Maris, the receptionist stopped him and said that Alicia had left some things behind and they had held onto them. He handed him a box and he took it and headed out to his truck. There was a ring and an envelope with $23,000. That was enough money to get him out of the country. In the courtyard of the bodega, he kept his bicycle. He and Guillermo made an arrangement for his occupancy of the windmill. At night, he could hear the water and the horns of ships. He walked the beach daily, even when it rained. He thought of her, in her white gown, carrying the barn lantern, out through the trees. Her other hand held the hem of the gown. He thought of his father, thought of him crouched to the floor during the countdown, 2, 1, 0, and then the horizon all white. When he was still living with them, he was the one who took Alicia to the doctors and had written into her notebooks things Alicia had said that he did not understand. Perhaps in the end, he came to realize that her illness was less a condition than a message. After he died, Bobby was walking on the street in Knoxville, and someone who knew them both asked him if he thought his father was in hell. In hell. Bobby looked at the man and said to the man, "No, not anymore." He was walking about the piazza for a coffee when an old friend from New Orleans approached him with a surprised smile. The man was delighted and asked why he was in Spain. Bobby said, "I live here." "You're shitting me," the man said. Bobby couldn't remember his name. The man and his wife were on vacation. When Bobby told him he lived in a windmill, the man said, "You're kidding me." The man said he had to take his wife back to the hotel. Bobby thought, "It's not my world anymore." He was walking the beach one cold early evening when the kid caught up with him. He looked as Alicia had described him. Bobby asked what he wanted, and the kid said he was just checking up on him. The kid said, "Don't give me a hard luck story. We tried to keep her alive, but it ain't easy with a doll like that." "Cheer up," said the kid. "Maybe you and sis can rendezvous in the sweet by and by and float on a cloud." Joaquin surprised him with a letter that had somehow found him here. The letter was battered and stepped on and faded, but it bore his name, postmarked Akron, Ohio. Who could ever have found him in such a place? He called back to Joaquin and asked he take the letter back. Joaquin was surprised. Bobby told him no longer knew anybody in America. Joaquin insisted he would hold on to the letter because people sometimes change their minds. It was cold in the windmill, and the only sounds were the ocean and the small animals that scurried through the rafters. He blew up the lamp, and as he lay in the dark, he knew that on the day of his death he would see her face again. And perhaps he could carry that beauty into the next world.